Earlier, I spoke to former NATO Deputy Assistant Secretary General Shea and asked him if he agrees with Stoltenberg's comments on NATO's role in Ukraine.
Well, I certainly think, Sally, that he has a point when it comes to NATO taking on this major role, which it has now finally, after 2.5 years of the war, taken on, of coordinating the delivery of weapons and coordinating the training of the Ukrainian forces. It's all been a bit haphazard, hasn't it, for the last 2 years, with individual countries sort of, depleting their stocks of what they have, what they're willing to give to Ukraine, which has not always been what Ukraine actually wants or needs. It's good that NATO now finally is setting up this new centre at Wiesbaden in Germany in September to provide that coordination and a training centre in Poland. But I certainly think Stoltenberg's got a point if he means that NATO could have done this from the very outset of the Putin's invasion of Ukraine 2.5 years ago, because clearly it would have had a bigger impact now in terms of Ukraine's defence.
Do you believe that the conflict itself has entered a new phase of intensity recently?
Well, it's certainly reached a much more decisive phase, obviously, and not particularly good news for Ukraine at the moment. The Russians have been advancing in the Donbass after being sort of stuck in a kind of First World War style trench warfare. The difference, I think, now is that having been rather a static war of counter-offensives not really going anywhere, it's now become much more a war of movement. Territory is being captured, both obviously by Ukraine in Russia, and now by the Russians pushing in the Donbass area. I think both sides clearly are trying to get as big advantage as they can, waiting to see what the outcome of the United States elections will be in November, because whether Trump wins or Kamala Harris wins, it's going to be probably very different if you're a Ukrainian or a Russian thinking of your best moves ahead.
Well, it's interesting because former President Donald Trump has just said this week that if he becomes president, he will be able to solve this conflict in a matter of weeks. What would solve this conflict? And is it possible, by any means, to do it in a few weeks?
Well, we've just had this peace plan, if plan is the word, presented by his vice presidential running mate, J.D. Vance, which is very much, it has to be said, along the lines of what Putin has been putting forward. Ukraine would concede large chunks of its territory to Russia, particularly the part that Russia, 18% of Ukraine, that Russia is currently occupying. The country would be largely demilitarized. It would give up any right to join NATO, although some kind of rump Ukraine would nonetheless survive. This is the nightmare, of course, President Zelensky and most Ukrainians. And if that's the deal, there wouldn't need to be much of a negotiation. It would simply be pressure on Ukraine, for example, denying it support or denying it weapons, to force it to accept that deal. That's why I think that what Zelensky is trying to do is to try to get Biden to give Ukraine as much as possible in terms of military aid, in terms of the green light to use long-range missiles to strike Russian territory, so that in the time before the next president takes over in Washington in January, the Ukrainians can push their advantage as far as possible. Then, of course, I think Zelensky would be very much hoping that it would be Kamala Harris who would win, and therefore a continuation of the Biden administration's aid to Ukraine, albeit a little bit hesitant, as we've seen on the lack of a decision on the long-range missile strikes, but at least there would be more continuity and change. But November, I think, for both sides, as I said earlier, is really the key point in determining how they're going to strategize the conflict in the months ahead.